You didn't miss the red flags. You just didn't trust yourself enough to act on them. Stay tuned. We're going to dig in. Welcome to the Secret Formula of Femininity for women who want to live a more feminine, fun, and fabulous life. I'm Dr. Nicole Monteiro, your host on this weekly journey to unlocking your inner radiance, nurturing fulfilling relationships, and becoming the best version of yourself. Welcome back to the Secret Formula of Femininity. I'm your host and guide on this journey to tapping into your feminine essence, Dr. Nicole. Listen, there's been a lot of conversation lately about relationships ending publicly, unexpectedly, celebrities, famous people, sometimes very messy breakups. And people always ask the same questions on social media, in the comments, even in real life conversation. What went wrong? But what I've learned both personally and professionally is that most relationships don't fall apart at the end. That's the part we see. They unravel slowly from patterns that were there in the beginning, patterns that we probably noticed in ourselves and in the other person, but didn't fully trust. So today I want to talk about something deeper than the red flags conversation. I want to talk about why we actually ignore them when we notice them, why we explain them away, and why we stay long after we should have gone, even when something doesn't feel right. Red flags don't feel like danger at first, they feel like confusion. So let's talk deeper about what red flags actually feel like. We tend to think that red flags are these big, obvious things. They're dramatic, they're clear, but most of the time they're not. And that's with most things in life. They show up as things such as inconsistency, emotional distance, mixed signals. One minute you're love bombing, giving me everything. The next minute it's like a breadcrumb. You're giving me little and little. Something just feeling off that you can't explain. And because they're not obvious, you start asking yourself, am I overthinking? You literally gaslight yourself. Am I being too sensitive? Maybe I just need to give it time. I need to loosen up. You're not confused because it's unclear. You're confused because what you're experiencing doesn't match what you hoped for. And so, first, we have to understand our hopes and expectations and how they shape what we notice, what we experience, and what we decide to ignore. So, why do we ignore red flags? Let's go deeper. Because the real work is in understanding this. The first thing is that hope often overrides clarity when you see potential. This is so common for women, especially super smart women who are used to analyzing and seeing how a thing can get done. So they're really focused on that North Star, that potential. But with women in red flags and relationships, what happens is you start focusing on who they could be, not who they're consistently showing you that they are in this moment. Potential is actually one of the biggest reasons women stay in misaligned relationships. And sometimes this compounds the more relationships that you've experienced. So you kind of know what to look for, what not to look for, and you start creating in your mind the ideal partner. So you know what the ideal is for you, what you want it to look like. And that then goes into what you hope it will look like. And then that becomes a whole project that you've built in your mind versus what is consistently showing up in front of you. So potential in relationships can be very dangerous. Listen, I'm one of the first people to tell people to think positively, be optimistic. What you hope and dream for and work towards is what you will get and achieve and attract. But when it comes to another person and being an intimate, close relationship with them, you cannot go on potential because it's a two-way street. So if you're building up potential and idealizing a person, what they could be in your mind, and they're not even part of the conversation, that's where things start to fall apart. So potential can be especially dangerous for the high achieving woman who's used to getting things done, having goals, working towards things. So I really want you to watch out for that. The second thing is attachment patterns. If you lean anxious, which many women do, inconsistency doesn't feel like a red flag. It feels like something for you to fix. It feels familiar to your attachment pattern. So it's like, okay, I know what this feels like. I'm getting anxious. There's something for me to fix and something for me to do. On the other hand, if you lean avoidant, distance feels familiar and it's not concerning. So a person who's more withdrawn, inconsistent, not showing up, it just feels like that's how things have always been. This is familiar to me. So either way, on those extremes with the anxious attachment or the avoidant attachment, you end up internalizing or seeing another person's inconsistent behavior through your lens, either something to just accept or something to fix. And that can be very dangerous. The third thing is emotional investment. There's this theory, even in economics, called the sunken cost theory. The more time and energy and emotion you invest, the harder it is to step back and see clearly. It's like, okay, I've gotten this far. I don't want to quit now. And sometimes that language in the culture reinforces that. It's like, never give up, never quit, keep going. And I believe in those things, and those things are very useful. We need to understand how to stick with something, but we also need to understand the art of quitting. It's a very specific art. The art of knowing yourself enough to know when it's not you, when you've exhausted all your options, or when to cut your losses in time before you're too far gone. This is something that's also important in the investing world. You hear me talk a lot about investing in the stock market. There's a certain emotional stance that you have to take. Now, I'm not saying that you're as removed in relationships, but there is a part of you that needs to be able to see something from a more objective perspective, not just based on the emotions that you have invested in something, the time you have invested in something, or the energy you have invested in something. So the problem becomes the more you invest, the more you want it to work, even when it's not working. The fourth thing is you were taught to be understanding. And it's not a bad thing, right? Many women are deeply compassionate. That's a key part of feminine energy. You see their wounds, their past, their potential, and you tell yourself, they just need time. They've been hurt before. You are super empathetic and compassionate. Now, listen, you've heard me say that feminine energy is dangerous without boundaries. It's the same thing. Compassion, empathy, and understanding can be dangerous to you without the ability to step back and see things for what they are. There's an archetype of man called the wounded warrior, and that's a person that you can trauma bond with immediately. He seems open, he seems emotionally intelligent, communicative, in touch with himself, and he's pouring out his heart to you. Not only does that make you feel like he's at an elevated level of intelligence, it also pulls you in and draws you in to his story to where you almost forget yours. So being too understanding without having the boundaries and without looking at your needs and centering what's useful and important to you can just make everything unravel. Compassion without boundaries becomes self abandonment. So I want us to talk about red flags versus triggers. This is so important because sometimes we get triggered and that's coming from us and it's not really about the other person. Not everything that feels uncomfortable is a red flag. A trigger is something that activates your past. I often tell people when we're upset and activated, sometimes we're arguing with a past person, a past hurt, a past trauma. We're not really arguing with the person in front of us. But a red flag, on the other hand, is a pattern that signals misalignment. So you have to ask yourself in these situations, is this something I feel because of my history, or is it something that they are consistently showing me? That is the key distinction. Is it my history, or is it what they're consistently showing me? Your emotions are valid, but they're not always instructions for you to immediately react to. And as you continue to do that self awareness work, you're not doing it in order to just accept anything from anybody. I think that's where people get mixed up. They think that doing the work means that you're just this sweet little flower that accepts all kind of mistreatment. that that's what softness about is about. But it's really about knowing the distinction or the art of understanding yourself while being able to read and understand others and when they're not aligned or right for you. So, what is the actual cost of ignoring red flags? Ignoring red flags doesn't just impact the relationship, it impacts you. One thing it does is it makes you lose self trust. Every time you override your intuition, again, another key part of your feminine energy, you end up weakening your connection to yourself. And it becomes this cycle. The more and more you lose self trust, the more you lean into what somebody else wants, what they're saying, what they're doing, and you're leaving yourself out of it or you're abandoning yourself. Then you become more anxious because deep down, you know something isn't aligned. The body doesn't lie, the emotions don't lie, even the intuition doesn't lie. You end up staying longer than you should, and then clarity gets delayed and it gets more and more confusing to you. Now, I'm not saying that you jump ship every time you get triggered or offended. That's the thing. When you understand the difference between your triggers and you know how to be aware of your triggers, address them, soothe yourself, find inner peace within yourself, then you're able to really look at what's aligned with you and what's not. And most times with these red flags, we're just confused. The issue isn't that you didn't see it, it's that you didn't trust what you saw. I want to pause for a minute so you can reflect on this. Think about a past relationship where something felt off early and ask yourself, what did I notice? What did I tell myself about what I noticed? What did I actually ignore? And most importantly, why did I override the messages that I was getting from myself? Reflecting in that way will put you way ahead in the world of relationship. I want you to remember your intuition whispers before your reality shouts. You just have to be still enough, quiet enough, and willing enough to listen to those whispers. All right, so I want to answer some questions that I get from women all the time about red flags in relationships. Because honestly, a lot of what we're seeing in the media, on social media, on the discussion boards, it's really causing a lot of confusion for people. Women are actually feeling hopeless and helpless about relationships when they hear about a celebrity breakup. And I want you to reorient yourself so that you focus on understanding yourself and your patterns versus getting beside yourself and all worked up based on what's happening with somebody else that you don't even know. All right, so the first question is, how do I know if it's a red flag or if I'm overthinking? Again, we want to look for patterns. One moment is not the issue. A moment in time doesn't tell the whole story. It's about consistency, what shows up. So we say we want a man to be consistent in a positive way. Well, you need to look and see if some of the behaviors that you're not willing to tolerate are those moments or are those consistent patterns. The second question is, what if I see red flags, but I really, really like him? Okay. So, like my grandma used to say, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can like someone and still not choose them because liking someone doesn't make the patterns and the red flags go away. Attraction doesn't equal alignment. And I think that's where a lot of us get caught up. We feel like the initial attraction, which is part of the biology and the psychology and the emotional part of what brings people together to bond. But the real connection, the real work, and the real long lasting relationship happens way after that. So that's a step, but it's not the foundation at all. Question three is, can people change if I communicate? All right, I love this because I answer it in a number of ways on different episodes and in different contexts. Yes, we need to be responsible for how we communicate, especially when I talk about feminine communication, but that's for you, right? Yes, absolutely, people can grow, but growth requires their awareness and their willingness. You can't force that on anybody. So, consistent effort is what's needed on their part, not your communication. You can only take ownership for your part. And then if the person doesn't take ownership for their part, with their willingness, with their awareness, with them consistently leaning into what they need to work on, then it's not going to work. It's not going to work. You can't force change in anybody. Question 4 is, why do I keep attracting the same type? The bottom line is patterns don't change until awareness changes. So you are attracting the same type, it's familiar to you. You're not really getting to the heart of it, understanding how you've been socialized or the messages you've taken in, your attachment patterns, why you're shying away from the discomfort of really acting on noticing the red flags. These are all the patterns that you have to be aware of. And if you're not aware and willing to then take the steps, then nothing's going to change. And finally, question 5 is, what does it look like to trust myself early? It looks like honoring discomfort. I just talked about discomfort with the other question. We shy away from discomfort, but discomfort is often our messenger. You have to be able to ask the right questions and be clear and direct at times. There's an art, there's an ebb and a flow to communication. And you need to be just as comfortable asking direct questions as you are doing the other subtle things that come with feminine communication. You also don't want to over explain someone else's behavior. If they're not even giving you an excuse, but you're giving out excuses and passes for their behavior because you like him, then that is a way of, then that's an indication that you're not trusting yourself early on. And also, you have to be willing to walk away sooner. That's why it's important to pace yourself when you meet someone. You don't want to go all in, trauma bonding, oversharing, feeling so connected, and you all haven't even established or you haven't had the time to notice what the patterns are. And then if you go too fast, it's harder to walk away because of that sunken cost theory that I talked about, where you feel like you have invested so much that you're just not willing to pull back. Thank you all for those questions. They're so important because it's what a lot of women are thinking. If there's one thing I want you to take from this episode is this. You didn't miss the red flags. You saw them. You have the ability to see them. But you didn't trust yourself enough to act on them. And that's not something to shame yourself for. It's just something to become aware of. Awareness is so powerful. It's the key to all of the change and the transformation that you're looking for. Because the goal isn't to be perfect in relationships, the goal is to be connected to yourself inside of relationships so that you're not constantly self abandoning, losing yourself, and ignoring what your intuition is telling you. If you're realizing that you've been overriding your instincts in relationships, this is exactly the work that we focus on inside the Boundaries to Bliss Society. This is my inner circle community. And this is where you learn how to trust yourself, how to set clear boundaries, and how to choose relationships that feel aligned, not confusing. You can learn more about the inner circle, the Boundaries to Bliss Society, at the link in the show notes. Finally, I want you to know you don't need better partners, you need a deeper trust in yourself. Again, thank you so much for joining. And until next time, stay soft, stay intuitive, and stay feminine. I'm Dr. Nicole.